The Snow Queen, the tale of 7 stories. First story, which has to do with a mirror and its fragments. Now then, we will begin. When the story is done, you shall know a great deal more than you do. He was a terribly bad hobgoblin, a goblin of the very wicked sort, and in fact, he was the devil himself. One day, the devil was in a very good humor because he had just finished a mirror with a peculiar power. Everything good and beautiful reflected in it seems to dwindle to almost nothing at all, while everything worthless and ugly became most conspicuous and ever uglier than ever. In this morning, the loveliest landscapes looked like boiled spinach, and the very best people became hideous or stood on their heads and had no stomachs. Their faces were distorted beyond any recognition, and if a person had a freckle, it was sure to spread until it covered both nose and mouth. "That's very funny," said the devil. If a good, biased thought passed through anyone's mind, it showed in a mirror as a kind of grin, and the devil laughed aloud at his ingenious invention. All those who went to the hobgoblin school, he had a school of his own, told everyone that a miracle had come to pass. Now they asserted for the first time you could see how the world and its people really looked. They scurried about with the mirror until there was not a person alive nor a land on earth that had not been distorted. Then they wanted to fly up to heaven, scoff at the angels and our Lord. The higher they flew with the mirror, the wider it grinned. They could hardly manage to hold it. Higher they flew, higher still, nearer to heaven and to the angels. Then the grinning mirror trembled violently, slipping from their hands and falling to the earth, where it shattered into hundreds of millions or billions of bits, perhaps even more. And now it caused more trouble than before it was broken, because some fragments were smaller than a grain of sand, and these went flying throughout the wide world. Once they got in people's eyes, they could stay there. This piece of glass distorted everything people saw and made them see only the best side of things, for every little bit of glass kept the same power that the whole mirror possessed. A few people even got a glass splinter in their hearts, which was terrible, for it turned their hearts into lumps of ice. Some of the fragments were so large that they were used as window panes, another kind of window through which you should look at your friends. Other pieces were made into spectacles, and evil things came to pass when people put them to see clearly and to see justice done. The fiend was so tickled by it all that he laughed till his eyes were sore. But fine beasts of the glass are still flying through the air, and now you shall hear what happened. Second story, a little boy and a little girl. In the big city, it was so crowded with houses and people that few found room for even a small garden, and most people had to contend with a flower pot. But two poor children who lived there managed to have a garden that had bigger than a flower pot. These children were not brother and sister, but they loved each other as much as they had it been. Their parents lived close to one another in the garage of 2 adjoining houses, where the roofs met and the rain gutter ran between the 2 houses. The 2 small windows faced each other. One had only to step across the rain gutter from window to window. In these windows, the parents had a large box where they planted vegetables for their use, and a little rowboat too. Each box has a bush, which thrived to perfection. Then it occurred to the parents to put these boxes across the gutter, where they nearly reached from one window to another, looking precisely like 2 walls of flowers. The pea plants hung over the boxes, and the rose bushes threw out long sprays that framed the windows and bent toward each other. It was almost like a triumphant arch of greenery and flowers. The boxes were very high, and the children knew they were not to climb about on them. but they were often allowed to take their little stool out of the roof under the roses, where they had a wonderful time playing together. Winter, of course, put an end to this pleasure. The windows were often frosted over completely, but I could heat copper pennies on a stove and press these hot coins against the frost-coated glasses. Then they had the finest peepholes as round as the ring, and behind them appeared a bright, friendly eye, one of each window. The little boy and the little girl who peeped out. His name was Kay and hers was Zelda. With one skip, they could join each other in summer, but to visit together in the winter time, they had to go downstairs in one house and climb upstairs in the other. Outside, the snow was swirling. "See the white bees swarming," the old grandmother said. "Do they have a queen bee too?" the little boy asked, knowing that natural bees have one. "Yes, indeed they do," the grandmother said. "She flies in the thick of the swarm. She is the biggest bee of all and can never stay quiet on the earth, but goes back to the dark clouds again. On a wintry night, she flies to the streets and peers in through the windows. Then they freeze over in a strange fashion as if they were covered with flowers." "Oh yes, we've seen that," both the children said, so they knew it was true. "Can the Snow Queen come in here?" the little girl asked. "Wow, let her come," cried the boy. "I could put her into the hot stove and melt her." But grandmother struck his head and told them another story. That evening, when little Kay was at home and half ready for bed, he climbed on the chair by the window and looked through the peephole. A few snowflakes were falling, and the largest flake of all alighted on the edge of one of the flower boxes. This flake grew bigger and bigger until it finally turned into a woman who was dressed in the finest white gauze, which looked as if it had been made from millions of star-shaped flakes. She was beautiful and graceful, but she was eye-shining, glittering eyes. She was alive for all that, and her eyes sparkled like two bright stars, but there was neither rest or peace in them. She nodded toward the window and beckoned with her hand. The little boy was frightened, and as he jumped down from the chair, it seemed like a giant bird flew past the window. The next day was clear and cold. Then the snow thawed, and springtime came. The sun shone, the green grass sprouted, swallows made their nest, windows were thrown open, and the little children played in the little roof garden, high up in the rain gutter on the top of the house. That summer, the roses bloomed their splendid best. The little girl had learned a hymn in which a line about roses reminded her of the old flowers. She sang it to the little boy, and he sang it with her. "Where roses bloom so sweetly in the vale, there shall you find the Christ child without fail." The children held each other by the hand, kissed the roses, looked up at the Lord's clear sunshine, and spoke to it as if the Christ child were there. Those glorious summer days were, and how beautiful it was under those fragrant rose bushes, which seemed as if they would never stop blooming. Kay and Zelda were looking at a picture book of birds and beasts one day, and it was then, just as the clock in the church tower was striking 5, that Kay cried, "Oh, something hard in my heart, and now I got something in my eye." The little girl put her arm around his neck, and he blinked his eyes, but no, she couldn't see anything in it. "I think it's gone," he said, but it was not gone. It was one of those splinters of glass from the magic mirror. You remember that goblin's mirror? The one that made everything great and good reflected in it appear small and ugly, but magnified all evil things until each blemish loomed large. Poor Kay fragment has pierced its heart as well, and soon it could turn into a lump of ice. The pain had stopped, but the glass was still there. "Why should you be in cry?" he asked. "It makes you look so ugly. There's nothing the matter with me." And suddenly he took it into his head to say, "Ugh, that rose is all worm-eaten. And look, this one is crooked. And these roses, they are just as ugly as they can be. They look like the boxes they grow in." He gave the boxes a kick and broke off both the roses. "Kay, what are you doing?" the little girl cried. When he saw how it upset her, he broke off another rose and then left home through his window, leaving dear little Zelda alone. Afterwards, when she brought out her picture book, he said it was fit only for babes in the cradle, and whenever grandmother told stories, he always broke in with a "but." If he could manage it, he could steal behind her, put a pair of spectacles on his nose, and imitate her. He did it so cleverly that it made everybody laugh. And before long, he could mimic the walk and the talk of everyone who lived on the street. Kay could mimic everything odd or ugly about them so well that people said, "That boy has surely got a good head on him." But it was the glass in his eyes and heart that made him tease even little Zelda, who loved him with all her soul. Now his games were very different from what they used to be. They became more sensible. When the snow was flying about one wintry day, he brought a large magnifying glass out of the doors and spread the tail of his blue coat to let the snowflakes fall on it. "Now look through the glass," he told Zelda. Each snowflake seemed much larger and looked like a magnificent flower or a 10-pointed star. It was marvelous to look at. "Look, how artistic," said Kay. "They are much more interesting to look at than real flowers, for they are absolutely perfect. There isn't a flaw in them until they start melting." A little while later, Kay came down with his big gloves on his hands and his sledge on his back. He bowed out in Zelda's ear. "I've been given permission to play in the square where the other boys are." Then he ran away. In the square, some more adventuresome boys would tie their little sledges behind the farmer's carts to be pulled along for quite a distance. It was a wonderful sport. While the fun was in his height, a big sled drove up. It was painted entirely white, and the driver wore a white saggy fur cloak and a white saggy cap. As the sleigh drove twice around the square, Kay quickly hooked his little sled behind it, and down the street they went faster and faster. The driver turned around in a friendly fashion and nodded to Kay as if they were old acquaintances. Every time Kay started to unfasten his little sleigh, its driver nodded again, and Kay held on, even when they drove right out through the town gate. Then the snow began to fall so fast that the boy could not see his hands in front of him as they sped on. He suddenly let go of the slack of the rope in his hands to get loose from the big sleigh. But it did not good. His little sleigh was tied on securely, and they went like the wind. He gave a loud shout, but nobody heard him. The snow whirled, and the sleigh flew along. Every now and then, the shoulder jumped as if it were clearing hedges and ditches. The boy was terror-stricken. He tried to say his prayers, but all he could remember was his multiplication tables. The snowflakes got bigger and bigger until they looked like big white hands. The curtain of the snow parted and the big sleigh stopped, and the driver stood up. The fur coat and the cape were made of snow, and it was a woman. Tall and slender, blinding white, she was the Snow Queen herself. "We have made good time," she said. "It is possible that you tremble from the cold. Crawl under my bare coat." She took him up in the sleigh beside her, and as she wrapped her fur around him, he felt as if he were sinking into a snowdrift. "Are you still cold?" she asked, and kissed him in the forehead. Brr! That kiss was colder than ice, half of which was already an ice lump. He felt it right down to his heart. He felt as if he were dying, but only for a moment. Then he felt quite comfortable and no longer noticed the cold. "My slate! Don't forget my slate!" It was the only thing he thought of. They tied it into one of the white hens, which flew along after them with the slate on its back. The Snow Queen kissed Kay again, and then he forgot little Gerda, grandmother, and all the others at home. "You won't get any more kisses now," she said, "or else I should kiss you to death." Kay looked at her. She was so beautiful, a cleverer and prettier face he could not imagine. She no longer seemed made of ice, as she had seemed when she sat outside his window and beckoned to him. In his eyes she was perfect and not at all afraid. He told her he could do mental arithmetic, even with fractions, and knew all the country's sizes and populations. She kept smiling, and he began to fear that he did not know as much as he thought. He looked up at the great big space overhead as she flew with him high upon the black clouds, while the storm whistled and roared as if it were singing old ballads. They flew over forests and lakes, over much land and sea. Below them the wind blew cold. Wolves howled, and black crows screamed as they skimmed across the glittering snow. But up above, the moon shone bright and large, and on it Kay fixed his eyes throughout that long, long winter night. By day, he slept at the feet of the Snow Queen.